Welcome to our monthly Bright Ideas Press Hangout. We are so glad to have you here, whether you're live on the event page, watching via YouTube, or maybe you're watching later on, watching the recording. We're just so glad that you're spending this time with us, and we hope and trust that it will be very beneficial. We'll answer some of your questions and give you some great ideas for using timelines in your homeschool. We are Bright Ideas Press, and you can find us at brightideaspress.com. Today with us, we have Tyler Hogan, we have Suzanne Broadhurst, and we have Susan Evans. And all of us are homeschool parents, and we're here to share with you from our own experiences what has worked, what hasn't worked, what we're doing, and what we've tried. We love to hear from you, so if you're watching live or watching recorded, feel free to leave comments for us on Google Plus or on the YouTube channel or even on our Facebook page. We love to get that feedback from you. So I'm going to give our panelists the time to introduce themselves. Tyler, would you start off, please?
Sure. My name's Tyler Hogan, and I work here at Bright Ideas Press. I'm a homeschool graduate, and my wife is also a homeschool graduate. We've got 3 little girls, and the oldest is in kindergarten right now. So we're just getting started with our own homeschool, having a blast. I use timelines pretty much as far back as I can remember, so I like them. They were very useful for me, and I'm excited about this topic.
Me too. I love timelines myself. Suzanne, introduce yourself to everyone, please.
Well, my name is Suzanne Broadhurst, and I live in Jacksonville, Florida. I have 2 children who are both in college now. I've homeschooled them both from birth all the way through high school graduation, and we used timelines from preschool all the way through the senior year in high school.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. So you have a wealth of experience, and I know you're very creative, and I'm sure you put a lot of your special touches on your timelines, and I want to hear all about that today. Susan Evans is another highly creative homeschool mom, and some of you may have noticed on the event page some photographs of her timelines, just amazing across her, I don't know if it's a living room or a family room or schoolroom, but Susan, tell us about yourself and tell us about that picture right off the bat.
Sure, yes. I'm Susan Evans, and I love doing hands-on learning with my kids. I homeschool my 4 kids using unit studies, and so that's how I homeschool. I enjoy it a lot. I live in Spokane, Washington, and since you're asking about the picture that I put in, yeah, we ran across the top of our wall some black paper. We got a roll of black paper. You can get that in any teacher supply store. If you don't have any in your area, you can go to some bookstores also sell it, or you can use black just construction paper and kind of, you know, tack it up with sticky tack, and then you put you know, timeline figures as you study them, and so it helps you to gain perspective on time as you put them up over the years. And that is our timeline that we've had up there for 6 or 7 years, and we've added to it over the years.
Wow, that is quite a project. So let me ask you a question, Susan. I mean, some moms would think, I don't want my living room to look schoolish. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there's a reason that I use the color black. It is very elegant, and it recedes back into the wall. As you can tell from the picture, everything looks normal and home-like in my room. My husband doesn't like things to look teachery and like a classroom. I know a lot of homeschool dads that feel that way. So you're lucky if you have a room that's completely separate that you can use for homeschooling. But if you don't, black makes things look elegant. I also use trim for the top and bottom, and it's teacher trim that is like corrugated, and it's black also. And so it basically what it does is it frames your you know, picture is what it is, if you keep it in mind that it's just one long picture in time. And so and then you can do your own line from construction paper that matches the decor in your room, okay? And you can even use scrapbooking paper that has really good texture or whatever. Match your pillows to it or whatever, you know. So it can really be gorgeous and pop, and then the black background makes all the timeline figures pop, okay? So, yeah, we've loved it.
That is fantastic, and I love how you have incorporated into something of your decor and you thought really hard about making it attractive. And I think that is a big criticism that people have with wall timelines. And in a little bit we're going to get into some of the different types of timelines, and that is definitely one of them, like what Susan's talking about, a long strip across a wall. But before we jump into those, let's back up just a little bit, and I'd like to hear what you guys see as benefits of timelines. So why should someone bother with a timeline? You know, when I went to school, we didn't do timelines. Suzanne, you probably didn't do timelines in school. Susan, you know, it just wasn't something we did. What are the benefits? Tyler, tell us some benefits of timelines and why we need to use them.
Well, I think the biggest reason to use a timeline is just to get a really solid grasp on chronology. I mean, a timeline is just a visual chronology, and knowing what happened first, what happened next, and seeing the cause and effect relationships is so huge. And I think sometimes what happens is, especially if you are used to teaching history thematically, you know, you study all of the Greeks and then all of the Romans, well, you miss the fact that there's hundreds of years of overlap between the two. And you don't get to see how what happened in one place in time influenced what happened in a different place in time. And timelines help clarify that. Timelines will show you the overlaps that otherwise are just really easy to miss. Even if you are studying things relatively chronologically, it can be really easy to miss some of those cause and effect and influence and overlap kind of ideas without a good timeline.
That's a good point, and there, you know, it's history. There's so much going on at once, and the timeline really gives you the opportunity to visually see that overlap. Whereas mentally, it's hard to maybe keep all that in your mind, and you know that they all happened at the same time, but the picture really helps you to see that. So that's
absolutely,
great.
and you shouldn't try and keep it all in your head. If you can keep it on the wall where it serves as a good reminder, or in a notebook or wherever you keep your timeline, that can be a lot more helpful, because your head makes mistakes, but once you put something down on paper, that's going to stay the same.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne, I'd love to hear your thoughts on benefits of timeline.
Well, the best way I can put it is when we're telling our children a story about say our own childhood, we might pull an event out of our life and tell them about it. Or maybe when we were in college, we did such and such, or in high school. And inevitably, the question is, why did you do that, Mom? And then you have to go back and tell the story that came before the story, so you can put it in context. And then they'll say, but why did you do that? And then you go back, and then pretty soon you have a family history. It works the same way with big history beyond the family. If we see an individual choice of an individual historical character, sometimes that doesn't make any sense until we put that in its historical context. And just having the context of why someone chose this, it was because this event happened before that, or this event happened before this. And so I think just having the context of choices was one of the big reasons why we continued on having timelines. And then also, and I can get into this one when high school comes up a little bit more, it really helped us take an interest and look at that interest throughout time and throughout history and be able to put that together in a chronological order that made sense.
So it sounds like a really holistic approach to learning history versus a very segmented approach that I think we see in traditional schools. I think it's very effective for really having a grasp of history. Susan, do you have something to add to this, benefits of timelines?
Yes, for me, I have loved being able to see like, for example, what comes before Christ and what comes after Christ, just visually in my mind. And then if you have about a foot per every 100 years, then you can see, like, this is 1,000 years away, this is like 500 years away, just spatially. And I never had that in school, and so it was all jumbled in my head, and I just had to memorize dates, and I'm not good at memorizing numbers, and so it was so stressful in school. And now that I homeschool and I've done a timeline from the very beginning, my kids have a place to hang, cognitively hang all of these events and people from history so that it makes sense. And in their minds, all they have to do is shut their eyes and look in their mind where it was and get a feel for that time period of when it was located. So any conversations you have in the future, you have intelligence about the major periods of time. And so that's the main thing that I love. But I want to mention that Suzanne's idea that she just gave me about timelines for like genealogy or family history, I'm gonna do that. That is awesome. So thanks for that idea.
We have some creative people on this panel here, lots of ideas. We have people watching out today. Thank you, Janine. We see you. And just press play, and you'll be able to see us. And Greta from Italy, wow, thank you so much for watching us today. We are so happy that you're with us. Let's talk a little bit about how do you make timelines. You know, get into the nitty-gritty of the different kinds of timelines. Now, I would probably break them down into, you know, something that goes on the wall, and again, there are lots of varieties in that, or something that goes in a notebook, several varieties there, and maybe even like something you hang on a string. I've done some timelines like that. So give us some of your tips and your favorite types of timelines and how someone would go about doing that. I mean, Susan, we've already heard that you use like this long strip along the top, but Susan, have you ever used a different format of timeline?
Yes, I have. And if you don't have space on your wall to be able to put up a timeline, these two different ways that I've done in the past have been in notebooks. This one particularly is a, if you see it closely, you just put down the timeline, you glue it onto what I do, of course, black construction paper, or cardstock paper is even better, and then you glue it or tape it in an accordion style, and then it's one continuous strip of paper that you can pull out from a notebook, and you can make it as long as you need to. And so that's one way to do it. And I've seen actual books that do this as well, as a whole book. And then I've also done in a 3-ring binder in notebooks, I've done this kind of thing where each page I put separately, and you punch it 3-ring hole, and then you just turn the pages, and so it's consecutive, like a history notebook for a timeline in it. So that's how I've, 2 alternate ways that I've done it besides my wall timeline. I have to say I prefer the wall timeline because it's up there at all times and you put one thing up at a time. Oh, and another thing I wanted to say is we do one figure at a time that as we study it, so you could do it that way. Or the accordion one that I just showed you, I glued all of it down at first at the beginning of the school year, and then we color one thing at a time. So that's another way that you can do it one at a time as you are studying each event in history or a person in history.
That is a great tip, and I think a lot of moms are going to feel relief right there when they realize they don't have to be cutting and pasting something every day. They could kind of do it in the beginning and then just color it. You know, some people are overwhelmed with cutting and pasting. I've always loved that, but not everybody loves that. So that is a great alternative, and I would have never thought of it. Susan, thank you so much for sharing that. Suzanne, I'd love to hear about different timelines you've used over the years, the actual format.
We've done a little bit of everything. We started with notebook timelines, and the nitty-gritties of that began with the children's birthdays. because, of course, as a small child, as a preschooler, it's all about them. And so I gave into that and made it all about them. And then we put the next big thing in their lives would be Jesus Christ. And so we made sure that we had a picture of him in there for when he died on the cross. And then we went on and added family members and with their birthdays, and it was really fun to ask the children, well, was Daddy born before or after Jesus? Was Grandma born before or after Jesus? And it's really cute when they're little, you know, some of the perspectives that they have. And so then we just built the notebook based on our family. And then as we learned about someone, and I'll be posting links to my website that has some pictures of some of their earlier drawings. If we learned about Beethoven, I have a little picture, I think it was Beethoven or Mozart, when he was, when my children were very small, and so they did the artwork for it, and it made it more personal. It wasn't just, you know, sometimes if you're studying, one old guy looks like all the other old guys. And when they're little, and so by them being able to pick out the important parts of, say, Einstein's hair, they could create their own, not only their own history timeline, but then their own history of their art development. And then sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, okay, so I'm guessing that the timelines were, maybe looked a little childish. Maybe they weren't perfect.
Very childish and very perfect. Just depends on your definition of perfect. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to really point out, and I wrote it down because I want to make sure I say this right, when you're doing timelines, keep the goal in mind. The key to timelines is not to create a cohesive work of art, unless that is your goal, but to create a cohesive understanding of history. So we found that letting the kids do their own thing when they were little really helped them get involved in history. When they were a little bit older and we started to study the Middle Ages, that's when I did the wall timeline, and I got the big laminated board, I guess, kind of like a laminated poster board and chart, yeah. And then I bought the pre-made, pre-printed timeline figures, and then we did a lot like Susan did, where we colored them for each one that went on. And because it was a chunk of time, it only took a small space on the door, actually in our hallway, rather than the whole dining room. And then when the kids got even older than that, we kind of, with some of the kids, with one of my children, I actually went back to the preschool days and let them create notebook timelines again using their own art. And I have some examples of that for high school. So we've done a little bit of everything with it. Oh, and then trifold timelines. We also did trifold timeline for our co-op because that's portable. And that's something that all the kids could see at once. Each individual child made a notebook timeline for mystery history, and then we all worked together on a group co-op timeline.
Well, what is a trifold timeline? Explain what you used as a base.
I have pictures of that I can show. I used a sewing board that I got at a craft store with a coupon, and my daughter and I were watching a lot of art design classes, or not classes, TV shows one summer because of some health troubles, and so we took a lot of our scrap fabric and we did a what do you call that? Like, not paper mache.
Decoupage or
like
Mod Podge?
Decoupage. Yeah, yes, exactly. Something like that with glue, with little squares of fabric. And we decorated the outside with that, and then the inside I just did a blue wash and drew the lines. And then my daughter and I created the little timeline figures for the kids to put on each week. And we used Mr. History. They're wonderful timeline critter ideas. You know, they'd have little, I don't know how to say, not really critters. Like if you were talking about, yeah, the figures and the ideas. Like if you were talking about somebody and Moses, say for example, the suggestion would be to draw him with a staff in his hands, and maybe a book of the law. So symbols, yeah, symbols to add to the little gingerbread figures that we made.
Okay, great. So the pro of the sewing board, you called it a trifold, is that you could take it back and forth from your co-op.
Right, right.
So it's
And then also
portable.
it was available for everybody to see all at once.
Okay, that is a great option. So, Tyler, we talked about a lot there. Do you have any other suggestions of types of timelines?
Well, I think the key is just to find something that's going to work for you and your family. There's pros and cons to every style, and some of it is a learning style thing. I always hated the poster style timelines as a kid, and I have no idea why. It was just they never really did it for me. I loved having it in a notebook. I liked having it in my hands rather than up on the wall. And so whenever I had the choice on how to do my timeline, I would do it in a notebook. And so it doesn't really matter what style you use, just find something that works for you. If you don't have a lot of wall space, the single poster or like the sewing board or trifold, or even, I know people who they would take their, big laminated poster style and they would just stick it on a piece of foam board as a backing and then hide it right behind their sofa. And that's a great, simple way. If you have no wall space, you can always stick stuff behind the sofa. It'll be relatively safe until you need to pull it out. Um, the Whether you're doing, something that runs all the way along the top of your wall, or poster style, or notebooks, or some people, they'll just use like a little recipe box and 3x5 index cards, and they'll stick their timelines in that, and they're just little memory cards, but it has the same function as a timeline. And the nice thing about, and the terrible thing at the same time, the nice thing about that is that you can use those cards for review games. You can play 52 card pickup and try and figure out, okay, which came first? Are you sure? All right, do we need to go back to the book and review here? So you can make it out of pretty much anything, and it just takes a little bit of creativity and figuring out what's your purpose, how are you going to use it? Is this something that's for one student or the whole family? If it's for the whole family, then a notebook style may not be the best fit for you, and you need something bigger that everybody can see. But if it's just for one person and they like having it in a notebook, that's great too. I think my favorite pre-made kind of style timeline is from a company called Add a Century. That's ADD a Century timeline. And it's this gorgeous notebook just filled with pages that you just add stickers to. And they've got a really brilliant setup. You should go and visit their website. But if I got to redo my timelines from high school, I would use their stuff because I love it.
That's great advice, and we want all the moms watching this to not feel overwhelmed and think you have to spend a lot of money. Start small, use what you have, experiment. And another thing I would suggest is use different kinds of timelines simultaneously. You can have a notebook timeline for one subject. You could have a wall chart for a different subject. You could have one-page timelines that you do, like a notebooking page for a week's lesson. I know that I always enjoyed just a one-page timeline for a biographical presentation. So I'd give my daughter that page, and it was basically just maybe 6 boxes, but she would sequence the different events in say a famous composer's life or a famous artist's life, and it's just a way to summarize what we'd studied about that famous person. So timelines can be as simple or elaborate as you want them to be, but don't be intimidated. Just try some different ways. There are so many things. So what grades?
Could I interject there real quick? One of the things that we would do is we would have, like you were saying, timelines for specific subjects. So we didn't always just keep all of our information on, the big timeline, the master timeline. We would do, like we did a unit study on the steps leading up to the Revolutionary War. And so each of the different skirmishes or the different taxes that were levied and all the different things that irritated the colonists, they had, we just cut out a little footprint shape and wrote whatever it was on there. And so we had all of these footprints leading up to the war. And it was just a little one unit thing, but it was really effective because, the idea of the footsteps is, okay, all these different items are all going in the same direction. They're leading us somewhere. And I think it was helpful not to try and do, each of those tiny little items on a giant master timeline, having a smaller timeline just for that little subject was really helpful for us. And you can do that with history studies, or people will do timelines that are just, like you were saying, I'm doing a study on composers, so I've got a timeline on the life of the composer or the life of the scientist that we're talking about in physics class or what have you.
Great, so fantastic. Let's shift gears and talk about what grades you use timelines for. And of course, we know the answer is all grades, but when do they work especially well? How do they change over the years? Because obviously, a first grader's timeline and a high schooler's timeline are going to be different. And then you can also talk about multiple ages. If you have multiple children that you're schooling together, how do you manage a timeline? Tyler alluded to this already, of maybe you have a family timeline and maybe you have personal timeline. So I'd love to hear how the moms there have handled this. Susan, you have 4 kids, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, we do have that timeline downstairs, like I said, where we have been putting things up over the years, and that has worked for all ages. It depends. I mean, the figures can be goofy and cartoon-like, so I don't know, when my kids get older, they might think that that's silly or something, but you can even find online, you can get clip art and stuff like that that's free, that's even, actual photos or great works of art, little clips of it or whatever. So you can use any types of figures. It doesn't have to be cartoon-like, but it's worked for us thus far. My oldest right now is 13, and I go all the way down to 7. But like I said, I've used this since my kids were babies. So like in creation, we put creation up on the wall like that. So from the very beginning. So my kids have seen all of history on the wall since they were really, really small. I don't think they remember not having a timeline. Now this year, for the first time, we're doing a Bible notebook. And so the accordion style thing that I just showed you earlier, that is for Bible class. And so all the Bible things, how they fit together in history, that's what I'm doing in that accordion style. And so it's different than the wall per se, kind of like Tyler was saying about, like footprints. If you're doing one specific time period in history, I go much deeper, and it doesn't all fit on the wall, And so for that reason, I have a separate notebook for the time period we're studying, and then just the major events go on the big wall one. So that's how I do it.
That is a great management tip. Suzanne?
Well, I've pretty much explained how we did it, starting with the notebook timeline, moving on to doing time chunks, and then going back to the notebook timeline. I did post a couple of links on there for y'all. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and would love to have more high schoolers in my life to do this with, is timelines for interest. And a lot of times we know what we have to teach and what the children need as a high schooler as far as their core subjects are concerned, but then the question is always, what do we do about electives? And of course, there's pretty much anything that somebody wants to learn can turn into an elective. My daughter was really into understanding fashion design. And so she did a fashion design. I don't know if I'll be able to show this very well, but she did a fashion design, the history of fashion plate design. I don't know if you can see that. Am I showing it? I don't know.
Hold it up higher. Just, you're going to have to, yeah.
Okay. And so she went through and started back in the mid-6th century BC. And she found people who were dressed in the period costumes in some library books, and then she would design her own picture with how she would design clothes for that time period. And I don't know that that's working out very well. There we go. And so she did that throughout history. That was really fun because, like Tyler was talking about the Revolutionary War and the steps to the Revolutionary War, my son is very much into the military, very much into military strategy. So he did a lot of that kind of thinking. He really didn't create physical timelines with that, but he put it in his brain's file folders, and he has a recall that way. So it was very sweet for me to be able to say, let's do one about fashion design throughout history. And because my daughter had already done some other historical timelines, by the time she got to high school, she could see why fashions of the day were not only being affected by history, but then were also affecting history. And then that continues even to today in the choices that are made.
I love how you let timelines be modified and customized by your children's interests. That is so smart, and I think homeschool moms need to be free to let their kids make some of those decisions and do the things that are fun, because your daughter, some people might think, well, she's just drawing costumes, but she was learning so much history and geography through that project. That is amazing. I love that idea. Just fantastic. So let's talk about high school timelines, because we have a comment. Diane Paisley is out there, and she said it seems like high school history turns into something more related to literature, and she really would like to hear how you can use timelines for high school. So Tyler, do you think you could share with us, and maybe as you're doing that, you could explain how The Mystery of History, published by Bright Ideas Press, incorporates notebooking, and also Illuminations, because it also has a high school level.
Okay, well, again, I definitely want to echo what Suzanne had to say about letting your kids' interests lead your timelining. I think that's great. One of my favorite timelines that I ever did was a timeline of pantomime, and just following the history of mimes and pantomimes from Bible times and ancient Greece up through, you know, modern physical theater and modern dance, and it was hysterical. And some of the things that I found out in the middle of making that timeline were just so much fun. But I think that high schoolers definitely have a lot of energy and a lot of creativity, and usually by high school they have an idea of how they like to organize information and what works for them and what doesn't. So the way the Mystery of History works is it gives you, for every lesson, it'll give you one, sometimes two different timeline items that need to go up in your timeline somewhere, and they may be people or events or ideas, or, you know, just the start date of something that you'll finish up later. But it always gives you, you know, at least 3 a week that you need to put in your timeline. And the Mystery of History gives you some suggestions on how to make one of those big sewing board timelines that Suzanne was talking about earlier. But again, you do what works for your family. I know people who they'll take the same ideas of what should go on the timeline and they'll use it in their notebook or in their memory cards or whatever other format is working for them.
So Tyler, does the Mystery of History actually tell you like the timeline figure from, say, the Homeschool in the Woods CD that you need to use, or is it more general?
Yes, it'll say, okay, go find a timeline figure or make your own timeline figure for Henry VIII. All right, and some people, they love to use timeline figures that are pre-made, and some people, they want to draw their own, and some people, they just like words, and pictures just don't do it for them, and so they just write the words on there. I was a word person. I hated putting timeline figures on my timeline. My mom made me put timeline figures on the timeline, and I would always, you know, skip past those pages as fast as I could. I don't know. I'm not a visual person at all. And I know that definitely puts me in the minority. But it tells you what you need to put up there. How you put it up is up to you. So if you want to put it up with pre-made figures that you just color in, if you want to write up the information, if you want to draw your own figures, any way is fine. Some people, especially people who use the Amy Pack Homeschool in the Wood timeline figures, which are beautiful, by the way. If I had to use timeline figures, I would want to use hers. But hers are great because they have the image, and it's black and white, so you can color it in if you're a coloring kind of person. And it's got the title and the date and a little caption or a little paragraph sometimes of information about it. And it's up to you how much of that you want to put on there. So if you just want the image and you write everything else yourself, that's fine. Or you can have, you know, the whole kit and caboodle up there. So there's a lot of, again, it's just a lot of flexibility. You just find what works. And the Mystery of History gives you a skeleton, and it'll give you, like I said, the specific directions for the sewing board. And the neat thing about that, especially in Volume 1, is that with the sewing board, it has you tracing the genealogy of Christ during the whole study. But again, you can do that even if you choose a different method other than the sewing board. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does, and I think that a lot of moms really appreciate the very clear guidelines because they want to do a timeline, but they don't have a lot of time to be researching, well, who should I put on the timeline and where do I find the figure, and that can be stressful for some moms. And so I like how Mystery of History, you outline it very clearly for them, and you tell them, these are the things you can put on there. Of course, they can put more, but making it easy for moms. We like easy, don't we, moms? Yes, we do. Dads do too. So,
and the Amy Pack CD is great because it has everything for the Mystery of History.
Yes.
You can get the individual packets, and those are great too, but I love the CD because you can print off the ones that you need right when you need them. You don't have to search through 80 pages of cardstock. And you can use them in other ways, like you can take the image and put them on your book report, or you can, some people like doing their timelines on the computer and then print things out at the end, and you can grab those figures and just plop them right onto your digital timeline too. And that's actually another form of timeline that we haven't talked about is digital timelines, and there's some neat websites out there. I may have to put some on the page later on, some links on how to make online timelines that do all the formatting for you, and there's some beautiful, beautiful websites that are free. That they're a lot of fun.
That's a great option for high schoolers, I think, because they're at that age where they're using the internet more and more for their own learning, independent learning, and that is a great option for a high schooler to go in there and pick those facts and organize it digitally. Suzanne, you're our veteran homeschool mom, so we'd love to hear how your high schoolers used timelines at that higher level.
Well, when I was in high school, of course, history was all about memorize the date, memorize the place, and memorize the person. And pretty much they didn't really get into a lot of the inner workings of the choices and the whys and the hows. Or if they did, I didn't pay much attention because I knew it wouldn't be on the test. And so, as a homeschooler, of course, I had a higher goal for my children. And so one of the things that we found studying history, and then by having timelines available, no matter which kind of timeline we used, is that choices build on choices, cultures end up building on cultures. That's something that is really helpful in the high school years to use timelines for, is to see, especially learning about, say, just as an example, India's influence on Britain, Britain's influence on India, the Dutch influence on all of that. And how each one shaped the different countries, their different homelands. For just as a simple thing, when it comes to cooking, curry is used in England quite a bit. Why curry? Well, when you start to find out about the history behind it, you see why the culture changes. And then also, rebellion builds on rebellion. We learned this when we studied art history. A different kind of timeline that we used in our art history courses at co-op was we created clotheslines. I just crocheted a big long rope out of yarn, and then I used clothespins and 3x5 index cards, and we created the different styles of art in art history, throughout art history, and put that all together in one big long clothesline, which again, portability. We could take it down, put it back up, put it in my little bag each week along with all of our art supplies. Also, advancement builds on advancement. You can see that throughout history. That's a really important thing in high school to cover. And then also that decline builds on advancement when you start getting into the decline of the Roman Republic, and you start to see how that is, maybe history is repeating itself. And we also find that advancement is built on decline. So as we see things in our own cultures declining, how can we advance on that instead of just accepting decline? Another thing in high school, if I can, is that throughout time we see a lot of evil stuff. I just finished reading an Albert Marin book about Napoleon and about all the horrific things that happened during that time frame. And there are people today who would like to blow evil off the map. Let's just get rid of evil completely. And yet, in that evil, we see God's hand of mercy being stayed. His hand, he is having mercy on us. And so that's another thing to teach in high school, is that yes, all this evil happened. Wow, how merciful God is. At the same time, we can see throughout history and in our own lives and culture that some would like to be justified for our own evil. And we don't want natural consequences. We don't want historically speaking or personally speaking, and yet we see God's justice in the state of the fallen world, and that he did have consequences. We also see God's faithfulness throughout history. He was faithful from the very day in the garden when he said, I don't want you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because when you do, you will see good and evil. Well, we tasted it, we see it, and we don't like it. But God was faithful to his word, and he will continue to be faithful to his word. And so that, I think, is the overarching principle of a timeline, is to show God from the beginning to what we're not even there yet at the end, and yet we know that God has been faithful, is faithful, and will be faithful.
So
that's how I would do high school again.
Yeah, you took it to a really deep level and really getting into philosophy and faith. Starting with a timeline. You know, who would have thought that a simple timeline could be so deep? But it showed us how it can be. We have a question. Janine asked how to use a timeline with a 5-year-old. You know, we're going the total opposite line here. What do you do when you're just starting out? And Tyler actually answered her, and I'm just going to pop his answer up here. He said, keep it simple, use fun pictures, and make sure it's at their eye level. And I think probably our biggest tendency would be to make it too complicated, don't you think? And put too much on there, and just keeping it simple. Tyler, elaborate a little bit on that.
With younger kids, because you're doing so many things either with or for them, it is so easy to make this your project instead of their project, and to turn it into something that it's not really supposed to be. It's not a chance for us to show off our artistic abilities or to set the bar for them when they start doing it themselves. This is what it's supposed to look like. It's just supposed to help them understand. That's really all that it's there for. So don't get too complicated. If there's only 3 things on the timeline, a beginning, a middle, and an end, that is a victory. We haven't done a whole lot with timelines with our kids. We've been doing a lot more with maps, just because that's I'm more of a map person than I am a timeline person, but I know that when we start, you know, we already have the perfect spot on the wall for it, and you just got to make sure that it's answering their questions is the big thing. Kids ask great questions, and make sure that you're answering them.
Tisha has a really great comment, speaking of maps, and I've seen her do this on her blog. You guys need to go to adventuresinmommydom.org. I believe it's org. She has done a combination of timeline and map for the World Wars, and I've seen how she uses this to teach her kids. It's very hands-on, and Tisha also recommends that when kids are young, you make timelines interactive, and I think what she means there is having movable parts, because I've seen this on her blog, and it's fantastic the way she actually uses the timeline on a map as a teaching tool. So as she's teaching the kids the events, the children are actually moving little figures across the map and assigning them not just chronological but geographic locations. And I love her approach to teaching. I think that is brilliant. Thank you, Tisha, for sharing that with us. So that kind of leads me into our next question, which is, what do you do with a timeline, right? So you have these timelines and you're making them, but what do you do with them, or do you do anything with them, and how does that build on the history learning? So who'd like to tackle that question?
I could answer that, I guess. If we do like a timeline for ancient Egypt, then we archive that on the shelf, and so we have the different timelines for the different time periods in the on the bookshelf. So that's how we do it. And I also leave up the main one on the wall all these years. That's how I've done it in my home.
Whoops. Okay. Suzanne?
Well, the one that we had on the wall, which was like the poster board, laminated poster board, we kept that up for years and years and years, to the point where we forgot it was there, because you just don't see it anymore if you're not talking about it on a regular basis, which we did early on. But then we would see it again, and then we'd start new conversations based on it. We just kept it on the wall until we started to see it and we had nothing to say. And then at that point, it was time to put it away. One of the best places that I found to have a timeline was actually in my dining room for a short time, because if dinner time conversation lulled, I could always just look up there and point to something and say, well, kids, tell your dad about such and such. And that worked for a little while until they got a little older, and then opinions started to differ. And that's a whole other subject about discussing history with our kids. This is so non-educational, but you know, we homeschool, and so that's the combination of home and school. Timelines are very schooly, but there is something so sweet about having those notebook timelines sitting on our bookshelf, and then the kids are off to college and we're dusting the little bookshelf and we come across the timeline notebook and we go through it and we see their pictures when they were little, and then we just accidentally leave them sitting out, so that when they come home from class, there's their little picture, and we can have those conversations and relive that moment. And I have to say that's probably my favorite thing to do with a timeline.
Okay, I know for our case, we used timelines for review. And very much like Tyler was saying, cards, we used a lot of hanging card timelines, and so I'd gather up some of the facts and say, okay, put these in order, and we found that to be a really good review at the end of something, or, you know, when you're revisiting something later, just to go back and put everything in context. And referencing, I know that we would often reference our timeline notebook when we would study something new, and we would say, oh yeah, remember we studied that artist, or we studied that war, but when exactly did it happen in reference to what we're studying today? And so we would actually pull out that notebook, and it became a personalized reference that you could use. And I think it's great to teach kids to look things up and verify facts, and what better way than to look at something they created themselves, right? Tyler, do you have any other suggestions for, you know, what do you do with timelines, and how do they help with history learning?
Yeah, well, I think don't discount the simple power of just writing something down. The timelines where I just had to take the information that was in my book and write it down in the right order, type it out if I was doing it on the computer, and add the figure if I was using them. Just that hands-on element does a lot to help cement the information. So it's sometimes, you know, I know we always want to be careful about not resorting to activities just to have busy work, but I think that there's a lot to be said for the review that comes with making something out of the information that you're presented. You know, it's not just endless worksheets. It's putting, you know, your eyes and your hands to work together, and that's good for solidifying information. It just helps it stick better.
So I'm hearing more of this keep it simple mantra that you have stated already. Don't get too elaborate. Don't think you have to make a big production. Keeping it simple is a good idea, which leads us into our wrap-up question as we're ending. So we're just going to close with each of you to give a closing thought, and here's your question. Let's say a mom wants to start with a timeline this week or next week. What would you tell her? How can she get started with timelines immediately without going out and investing a lot of money or time or energy? How would you tell her to get started? Susan?
Yes, well, I would have her take out some black paper You don't have to choose black. That's my favorite because it makes the kids' work pop. Even kids who color out of the lines and everything, when they cut that out and glue it onto black, it just looks so gorgeous and elegant, no matter what, and it's cute. So I would get some black paper and then do it whatever style you want. If you want it on the wall, you can put it on the wall. If you want to tape them together into an accordion or have a notebook, do that. Then I would get a piece of colorful paper, like maybe red or something like that, as the timeline line. And then I would add figures, either their own drawings or pre-made ones, to them as you were studying them in history. So that's how I would tell them to get started.
Well, that's great. It sounds doable. Doesn't sound too overwhelming. Suzanne, what would be your advice to that mom?
Well, I'd start with a stack of computer paper and a box of crayons. And I would start with having them draw a picture of themselves and put their birthdays on there, and then draw a picture of creation, have another picture of Jesus dying on the cross. This is one picture per page. And then if they know family members' birthdays, they can draw pictures of grandma and grandpa or aunts and uncles and mom and dad and put those pages in. And then be sure to put yesterday's headline. Think about what yesterday's news headline was and put that in the timeline. And then have this as a discussion point. Is this going to be important in 10 years? Is that news headline would that go on someone's timeline in 100 years? How about in 1,000 years? And they'll start to see, especially if they're older, they'll start to see the triviality of the news of the day. And then once you have that down, then add in, even if you don't know the exact dates or even close to the exact dates, but anybody that they have heard of from history. If they've heard the name George Washington and they know that he rode a horse, then have them draw a picture of George Washington on a horse and look up the date with them. So have them draw all the pictures and then use all their pictures of, they've heard of Beethoven, or they've heard of Napoleon, or they've heard of Gandhi, and have them sketch the picture of what they know and then go back with them, find out what the dates are, and then go through and put them in the timeline.
Fantastic.
And then if I had it to do all over again, the last thing I would do is I would create a birthday page for my timeline. And I would put the date that the timeline was born. I so wish I had that. I can only kind of go back and tell by their art styles, their art drawing abilities, when we actually started it, but I don't have an actual date, a birthday for the timeline. So I would create a birthday timeline page and add that on there. And then if you don't have a 3-ring binder, you just take a couple pieces of cardboard, poke 3 holes through it, and attach it with yarn, and you have your very first timeline.
Very simple. Everybody has paper and crayons. Everybody can do that. Excellent, Suzanne. Thank you so much. Tyler, what would you tell that mom who wants to get started with timelines?
Well, if you're using a poster, then go out and buy a piece of foam board so that you can stick it behind your sofa. If you want to do anything with timeline figures, either get yourself some figures that you know you're going to love, and again, the Amy Pack figures are tremendous, and go ahead and get the CD because you'll use them forever. Especially if you've got young ones, it's a good investment. That's just one of those things you'll keep using. If you have kids who are really artistic, buy them a new set of colored pencils so that they can make their own timeline figures. I think the most beautiful timeline I'd ever seen was by a girl who was in my class in high school, and she drew everything on her timeline. She loved to draw, and she just made everything gorgeous. And the time that she spent researching how to draw those things, that was a history study in and of itself. If you are doing a notebook style timeline, then go into Word and make a template that just has a line along the top so that you can write the dates on either side, the start date and the end date, and then write on lines down at the bottom so that you can write as much information as you want. And just have that as a template that you can print off over and over and over again, because you'll use it and you'll just keep on using it. So, I mean, like everyone has been saying, keep it simple, keep it fun. Don't try and be perfect. Something that's done and imperfect is 1,000 times better than something that's perfect but not done.
Absolutely agree with that in all areas of life, not just homeschool. That's just the truth about living, isn't it? Yes, that's so good. Well, guys, this has been a fantastic hangout about homeschool timelines, and I know that many people will be watching this video and learning and getting some super practical tips. I want to thank Susan Evans, Suzanne Broadhurst, and Tyler Hogan from Bright Ideas Press for sharing from their wealth of knowledge. I'm Jimmy Landley. I'm the social media manager for Bright Ideas Press, and I was moderating this talk today, and I want to invite you to come back next month. February 11th, our topic will be homeschool schedules. So getting into some time management and how to organize your day as a homeschool mom. Again, one of those areas we all need a little help in. So we hope that you'll join us again. If you've missed any of our old Hangouts, you can go to brightideaspress.com/hangouts, and you can find all of the videos there. You can also find them on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look for Bright Ideas Press. And they can also be found on our Google Plus page. We're everywhere. You can find these videos, and we'd love for you to share them on social media. You can embed them on your blogs, comment. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks everybody again for spending this hour with us, and we'll see you hopefully next month. Bye-bye.